What is the virtue of a proportional response?
That's the most Boatman way to open the episode, is to say it and then just stutter through the one line you had to say. Welcome back to Filmography. Wow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to FilmograFeed. I am your host, Caleb Boatman.
And I'm your co-host, Caleb Koho.
And today we are talking about Sorkin's third written film, The American President. This is a president who happens to be American.
Delightful romantic comedy.
Yeah, we'll get into it. But anyway, Sorkin's first film, we kind of talked about it a little bit last week, that this was his return to work with Rob Reiner, who he worked with on A Few Good Men, kind of talked a bit about the background. But there's some other interesting things that, Koho, I know you dug up, especially involving the people who were going to play the role. So I'll let you kind of give us a little bit of the background. How did we get to the movie that is The American President?
So originally, Robert Redford came to a bunch of writers with the premise that the president elopes. He just said those three words, and I gave it to a bunch of writers and said, "Make me a movie because I want to be the president." Sorkin, based on that treatment, he wrote a treatment for that. It was like 100 something. It was like 300, 400, 500. It was a huge script. Turned in like 400, 500 page script, which is ridiculous. But Redford read it and went, "Yep, this is the movie I want to make," with the intention that he was going to play the president, and he was potentially going to direct. And then Emma Thompson was hired to play Sydney Ellen Wade. She then turned down the role. When Rob Reiner was then hired to direct, Robert Redford dropped out of the film. It was not explained why until later, where it was suggested that he and Reiner did not get along, that they had clashing personalities. And that Reiner wanted to do something more about politics, while Redford wanted to do a love story, and so it fell through. Sorkin said he wrote the film on crack cocaine while living at the Four Seasons, and it took him 3 years to write the movie. They built an extensive White House set, which was reused for films such as Nixon, Independence Day, and the television show The West Wing. Used the exact same set for the White House. It's pretty insane. The film is believed to be set in the same universe as The West Wing, while also not. There's a lot of characters and things that are recycled and reused in The West Wing, especially a character by the name of Howard Stackhouse, who is called Governor Stackhouse in the film, from the state of Minnesota. A Minnesota senator named Howard Stackhouse later appears in The West Wing in the Stackhouse filibuster. The other things that include for the crossover is the CSTAT is brought up for the Capricorn Service to Air Defense, is brought up multiple times. The Global Defense Council, which is the environmental lobby that Sydney Ellen Wade works for, is featured heavily in The West Wing as well, as being specifically in the episode The Drop-In, and others. Amy Gardner and Josh Lyman's relationship is similar to that of Sydney Ellen Wade's. Those two have a lot in common in that way. Lot of influence on The West Wing in a lot of ways. It's talked about through and through.
It's interesting that you bring up that this was. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about The West Wing, but it is.
Oh, sure. Well, just say this does feel like his audition for The West Wing. This is the prototype for The West Wing.
Well, this is the movie that inspired The West Wing, and there is another thing I want to bring up about that. But the thing I was going to say was, it's interesting that you say that the original script was like 300, 500 pages.
Yeah.
Because typically it's common that a movie is
about a minute page.
A minute a page. This movie is only about what? It's
140
hours. It's about 2 hours. So about 120 pages.
Yeah.
So that means there was at least like 200 pages on the cutting room floor.
Yes.
I think he used a good amount of the stuff that got left out.
Oh, no, confirmed.
Later episodes of The West Wing.
Confirmed. Many of the episodes that you'll see in the Sorkin era are directly pages he took from this movie and then threw together to rewrote characters, change some dynamics, but took a lot of inspiration of things he didn't use in this for The West Wing. Things like the Stackhouse filibuster, the Drop-In, which they mentioned directly as being influenced by it, the Red Mass, Also, so many people from this movie do show up in The West Wing as other characters. Notably Martin Sheen and Joshua Malina are being major characters on The West Wing, who are major characters in this.
And I can't think of her name, but it's whoever plays Nancy McNally in The West Wing.
Anna Deaver Smith.
Yes, and she plays more of the Allison Janney equivalent in
Yes, and she's phenomenal.
She's very good, and so that kind of does bring me to we'll start talking about the actual movie.
American President. Yeah.
What? Yeah. We'll start talking about the actual American President here. This movie opens it opens with an opening credit sequence that is very nice looking with Mark Shaman's
score, who is nominated. The only nomination this movie got was Mark Shaman's score. Great score. Is also reminiscent of the show. The movie opens very reminiscent to the West Wing show.
Yes, that is true. But anyway, then we open, and I think it's also fair to say, this is the movie, in my opinion, where Sorkin becomes Sorkin. Even though I don't think it's one of his greatest
movies. His stride in this movie.
This is the movie where we really get like the Sorkin formula. Because I don't think we had gotten there in A Few Good Men. And we certainly got some of the beats of that in Malice, but Malice was a mess amalgamation. So it doesn't really count. This is the first true Sorkin movie. And we open up with the most Sorkin thing you can possibly do, a walk and
talk.
That is like any Sorkin show, movie, there's always a walk and talk. And
someone walks down the hallways, hand a piece of paper, walks down, hands the paper to another person as they walk by. It's the Seth Meyers sketch is amazing. It's phenomenal.
It is so good. The Seth Meyers Sorkin Perry sketch is probably the best Sorkin.
The best. It's unbeatable.
It is incredible. But anyway, this is where we are introduced to most of the supporting characters who are the president's staff. Let's first talk about Michael J. Fox, because
terrific performance from Michael J. Fox.
Absolutely. Introduced as the kind of speechwriter / communications director. They kind of merged those two jobs into one.
He's essentially playing Sam Seaborn and Josh Lyman in one character.
Yes, absolutely.
But this role here inspires him to get the role in Spin City, which is his big Back to the Future revival show.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, Michael J. Fox, he gets a lot of very fun moments here. I love his introduction where he's saying, "Oh, we just got this thing hanging out there," because he's talking about this part of the speech that was cut out, and he's clearly not happy.
I love that he specifically says, "You blew the C-section." Mm-hmm. Which, if you are a West Wing fan, you'll remember Toby's famous "You blew the D section" monologue. So he clearly reuses things from this, and it's really fun. It's really fun. If you're a fan of the West Wing, this is the closest you're going to get to a West Wing movie. And we're going to have to reference. You can't talk about this movie without talking about the West Wing.
I don't want to talk about it too much because I know not everyone here has seen the West Wing, and I don't want to get too lost.
Yeah, but you can't not talk about the two.
We are going to bring up a lot of the similarities, especially revolving around one performance, because it is so hard not to talk about it when you're thinking about this performance. But anyway, Michael J. Fox is fantastic here.
Brilliant as Louis Rothschild.
Like, Michael J. Fox is an actor who I truly believe does not get any of the credit that he should. Like, we consider him like the kind of goofy, like fun action comedy or adventure comedy guy. And like, when really he gets to like actually do things, he is so good. When he gets to have a little bit of dramatic weight, he is phenomenal. He is so good in this. He uses his comedic timing and wit. I'm so glad he got to read Sorkin dialogue because he's very good at it. He's built for it, I think. He has that kind of sharp wit that you need with Sorkin dialogue with just the right amount of like comedic takeaway with dramatic ability that like
he is. And his big moment where he throughout the movie he's like, we should be going for the guns. Like when he does that, his big moment where he finally does the let Bartlett be Bartlett, the no more Uncle Fluffy sort of moment is
Mhm.
really good. That is like an Oscar moment from him. I think, honestly, he could make my ballot in '95. He could make it. He's very good.
Honestly, like I I don't think you're crazy. Like
I
you
think
look at
this movie should have. I think it's crazy this movie only has a singular Oscar nomination. The movie is
yeah, like,
really well done.
especially in a year that I'm sorry, I don't think it's that great of a year for movies
No
in
nomination for, once
1995.
again, no nomination for Sorkin's screenplay is ridiculous because this is a phenomenal script from him.
It's it's a
Um,
it's a good script. I could see it getting in this year, which is a weaker year, especially for original screenplay. Um,
I think you have two phenomenal leads in Douglas and Benning, who we'll get to. Their chemistry is electric. These two
I
are
would
so
totally
good
have
together.
been okay with Annette Bening getting an Oscar nomination
She's
for this.
so great. Let's talk about her for a second. Annette
Well,
Bening is
let's
so
move
great.
back. I want to kind of go in the order that the
Sure.
characters were
All right.
introduced. So I kind of want to save her and
Sure.
Shepard for last because I think that they're kind of the two focal points of the
All right.
relationship. Right? But anyway, yeah, Michael J. Fox, I could totally see him getting in. Like I think he's better than like Ed Harris in Apollo 13. I don't think
He
that's
is
a
definitely.
controversial thing to say.
No,
I,
he's
I
absolutely better.
I'd be totally happy with Fox Game. But anyway, he's good. And then we also get, as mentioned, Andrea Smith, who plays
Who's
the press
she's
secretary.
phenomenal.
She
She's
is
really
really
good.
good here. There's a great moment towards the beginning where
Yes.
she references the fact that the president is a widow in a slightly negative way. And then she gets incredibly apologetic after. And
It's
such
a
great
really big moment where when you watch that part, you're like, that is CJ. That is CJ Craig. And you watch that part and she makes that kind of role her own, where it's just such an incredible moment where you're just like the immediate regret and professionalism that comes over her. You're just like, man, she is very, very good.
And I think that scene kind of sets up the thesis of the movie in a way of when is the president a person? I think is like that is the main thesis question of the movie. When is the president, and when
Which
he's allowed to just be a person?
And that is also set up and reinforced throughout the entire time. Pretty early on after this as well, when you have Martin Sheen, and he's like, we're alone, you know, you can call me my name. And he's like, of course, Mr. President. And it's like, which is a great moment. Those two are, that's another one. Martin Sheen and Michael Douglas are so good together.
They have a really good back and forth, and that does, I think. Well, I want to quick talk about David Paymer before we talk about Martin Sheen.
David Paymer is really fun.
David Paymer is very fun in this. I like David. I'm realizing I really like David Paymer.
I like David Paymer.
David Paymer is a very entertaining character actor that I like a lot. I've never seen Mr. Saturday Night, but okay, what do you associate David Paymer with? If I have to say, when you see David Paymer, what do you think of?
This movie. This is the movie that I most associate David Paymer with.
That's fair. Ocean's
Fair.
I think of him as like the hotel inspector guy who just gets absolutely screwed throughout the entirety of Ocean's 13. Of like, just you feel so bad for this guy because George Clooney and Brad Pitt are just making this guy life just absolutely miserable for the entirety of the movie because that's the way they have to screw over Al Pacino. But he is so funny in that. And he's really funny in this. I like him in this a lot. But yeah, we'll get into Martin Sheen now because I think we do have to bring up the elephant in the room, which is Martin Sheen, if you don't know, plays the president in The West Wing.
It is still so weird to watch him in this movie be the chief of staff and not the president.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was going to say, is that he's the president in The West Wing. His character in this is the chief of staff, and the dialogue and characterization is eerily similar to that of the chief of staff in The West Wing, played by John Spencer. So for us who watch The West Wing,
religiously,
Sheen, who both love The West Wing, if you can't tell, hearing Martin Sheen, who we know as President Bartlett, read the dialogue of essentially another character on that show is so jarring.
It is really weird.
Jarring.
Yeah.
It throws me off a lot, and it's very distracting, honestly. It like kind of takes me out of the movie a little bit, and it's not the movie's fault because the movie didn't know that the West Wing was going to be a thing, but it's very jarring. That being said, Martin Sheen is really good.
He's terrific. He really it shows you honestly the power of Martin Sheen as an actor who has so much range that we don't give him credit for, to go from something like Apocalypse Now where he's so good to then be in something like this where he is a totally different kind of performance, to then go to TV and play the opposite end of this performance and do it just as well, if not better. And it's like, really, he's such a great actor. Martin Sheen is like a leading man like persona who really belongs in the character actor role. Martin Sheen is a great character actor.
He really is. No, I completely agree. The fact that he's never been nominated for an Oscar is kind of crazy.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. He will probably never be nominated for an Academy Award. And the man has been nominated for like 9 Emmys and never won that either. The man just doesn't win the awards, which is weird because he's a great actor.
But Martin Sheen is very, very good. And yeah, he's great in this. And like, have you seen The Dead Zone?
I am not, but you told me he plays an evil Jed Bartlett.
It's like he plays an evil politician. So it's like his range is really, really good. He does not get enough credit for that. But yeah, he's very good in this. He gets a lot of great moments where essentially, like we said, the thesis of the film is when is the president, and when is the president a person?
Yes.
And he and Michael Douglas are old friends who have known each other for a long time, good friends. And yet he treats Andrew Shepard, Michael Douglas, like he's the president. He always says Mr.
At all times.
He treats him with the utmost dignity. He doesn't treat him like a friend. He treats him at all times. He treats him like a president. And I think that it annoys Shepard. It annoys Michael Douglas.
It does.
And that's kind of the core question of the movie is, does, he wants to be the Andrew.
Does he get to be a person?
Yeah, does he get to be a person? Is he just always going to be the symbol, the emblem of the office? Does he get to be a human?
And I honestly really love that. I think making a movie that really humanizes the office of the president is something that they always try to do, but they always do it in a negative way. I think that's something really refreshing about this movie, is that it's very optimistic and positive about the role of the president. And while he might be a little bit of drained by the role, he never doesn't want it. He never feels burdened by the role. He feels very up to task to be the president, but he feels a little weary of the respect of the office, which is an interesting take that not many political movies go in, where it's like the president is wary of the respect of the office, not the role of the office. And that's kind of nice, where it's like his big job in the movie is to get a bill passed. That's his big obstacle, is to get a bill passed in the midst of a budding re-election campaign. And that throughout that, his big issue is, I've been alone for so long, and I've met someone who I think I could really have a true connection with, but she can't see past the office, and no one can see past the office and see the person. And I think that's a really unique conflict for a movie.
I agree. And I think that segues us perfectly into talking about both, because I don't think you can talk about them individually. Talking about both Annette Bening and Michael Douglas in this. To quickly, though, talk about Annette Bening individually. What an incredible character introduction.
Phenomenal introduction.
One of my favorite moments in a movie is when Annette Bening comes in, says, I just want to take in the Capra-esque nature of it all. And Wendy Malick, who plays the environmentalist that she's working with.
She's really fun.
She's really good. I realized I like Wendy Malick in things. I didn't quite realize.
Fun.
Wendy Malick is fun.
She is a quintessential, weirdly enough, team 19, I guess now team 22 or 23 we're on, actress. She's like the mom or like the mean principal in a lot of things.
She's like the principal and the squeakquel. She's Chica or Chica?
Yeah, she's Chica in Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah. And the show. She in the Emperor's New Groove show.
She's Jesse Eisenberg's mom in Adventureland.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She's in all of these weird things. She's in Racing Stripes. She's in all of these Team 19 movies from our childhood in these like sort of antagonistic roles, and to see her in that like right in the pocket for her in this is really fun.
Yeah, no, she's very good in this, I think. I like her a lot. But anyway, Annette Bening comes in. It's like, I want to take in the Capra-esque nature of it all. And Wendy Malick says he doesn't know what Capra-esque means. And then the security guard, who I wanted to look up the actor who plays this guy, because he's a character.
Isn't it Tom Barry?
It might be. But anyway, you double check that while I say what happened. Tom Barry just says, with no negative to it or anything. He just says, "Oh, I know who Capra. I know, great American director. It's a Wonderful Life. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You have a great day, ma'am." Like, just that, I feel like absolutely sells you on not just who Sydney Ellen Wade, Annette Bening's character, is, and that she is someone who is overpowered by the presence of the Oval Office and the power of the office and the presidency, which is kind of the main, conflict point between the relationship. But more importantly, it also kind of sells you on what the movie is going to be. That this is kind of a harken back to that Capra-esque sensibility. Because I watched Mr. Smith Goes to Washington today to kind of double feature this in the American.
It's such a great movie.
And it is a great movie. And you can kind of tell the American president wants that same feeling of while still acknowledging the corruption, just that kind of love for the American system. And I think that's an interesting take. And I understand that it's easy to get cynical about that today. And I understand all the points you want to make about it. But there is something refreshing about this movie's optimism.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Sorkin gets a lot of like shit for, is the unfledgling optimism even in situations where it's like, hey, this is really dark. There's most of the time a really optimistic ending. The Trial of Chicago 7 gets a lot of shit for that. Being the Ricardos gets a lot of shit for that. We'll get to that later in his career. But like, he just likes a happy ending. And there's nothing wrong with a happy ending. And I think this movie is the definition of, we could be brutal and realistic and cynical, but I believe in politics and the American system, and I love it. And this movie is like, gives you, let's put reality aside for a moment and celebrate the idea of the thing and the idea of this thing that we have, and be happy and like upbeat and cheerful about it. And I just think optimism in movies is a refreshing thing that we don't get often anymore. So it's fun to go back to it.
Especially when it's not like, there's a difference between optimism that feels manipulative and optimism that still like is like, nope, there's still terrible stuff out there.
Yeah.
But if we, it's optimism that still acknowledges the negatives. And I think that's what this does. That's what Mr. Smith Goes to Washington does. The West Wing, of course, does a whole bunch of that. But now let's talk about both Annette Bening and Michael Douglas. Because one thing I want to bring up quickly before we actually talk about them. What do we think if it would have been Robert Redford and Emma Thompson?
I think this movie would be worse.
I agree. And I actually think Redford is fine. I think Redford and Douglas are probably on about the same level. I don't think Emma Thompson would be right for this. And it's not really even anything to do with Emma Thompson. I think the trick that this movie employs is very smart, which is you have Michael Douglas, who is, it's Gordon Gekko. It's the guy who just always kind of seems on top of his game. He's a movie star at this point, a major movie star at this point in 1995, probably like the peak of his career. Coming in, I had to, with all of his dignified tones. And then you've got Annette Bening, who comes in like the absolute underdog that she is at this point. Because at this point, she'd done like The Grifters and a few other smaller things.
Right. She wasn't Annette Bening yet.
She is not a household name. It's even arguable that she's not really a household name right now. But she was she wasn't even what she is now. Like, she had done a few things, but I think placing it at that point where you have movie star Michael Douglas and then you have Annette Bening, who clearly there's a power differential between those two movie stars or between those two actors, sells that exact same thing, which is the power differential between the president and activist Sidney Ellen Wade. I think that is like so refreshing and so interesting that we are essentially getting so many things communicated to us just by who these people are as actors.
Exactly. And I think their introduction is great. I think the introduction to each other is great because I think we get enough of Shepard up front where you're like, this guy is dignified, he's liked, he is a natural born leader doing his best, and yet he, like, you can just see it on his face that he's a little tired of being called Mr. President. And to then walk into that room when she is dogging on him to finally have a challenge. It feels like he wants a challenge. And when he walks into that room and she goes on and she just does that, and he's like, sounds like we should take him out back and beat him to death. It's just like a great moment where she's like mortified, but he loves it. He's smitten from minute one, and they just go.
He is so happy that someone was willing to talk to him like that. Like, he is overjoyed. I have never seen anyone more happy that they just got insulted. Like, it is such an interesting character. And then I love when they go into the Oval Office and she is just profusely apologizing at first. And he's like, you're fine. You're fine. It's fine. It's like when you and I apologize to you and I'm apologizing like 5 different times.
Yeah.
You're like, dude, chill. But anyway, then we get a great little moment as they are, she's basically threatening him with political repercussions because they're looking for a 10% reduction on this bill. But anyway, then she's like, there's nothing you can do. Who's going to stop me? And she starts walking out a door. Michael Douglas is just like, well, if you go out that door, the Secret Service will. That's my
private office.
You'll have to go out that way. Like, that is such a great...
You love that even when she's like firecracker, nailing it, sticking to him, he's still just like in love. He's just watching her and he's just smitten and he's just cool, calm, collected. Douglas, that's the thing that I think he's perfect for this role for, is he's very good at being calm and collected and just a little bit like, but then when he does get angry and rageful, like someday someone's gonna have to explain to me the reason for a proportional response, is like a great moment of rage. Or when they get on him about Ellen and he like has that rant where he's like, why am I not allowed to move on? Like, when he gets to be angry, it matters. You feel it because Douglas is so cool and calm early in the movie.
He is very good at letting the soft punches slide right off of him so that when something does actually affect him, you feel it. You feel it with intensity like nothing else, because he is so good at just letting the cheap shots just bounce right off him like he's Superman and you're firing bullets at him.
Right. He's terrific. And I think she's terrific because she can do 1,000 words. Bening is born for Sorkin. She just fires 1,000,000 words a minute that are just terrific. She just goes on go mode. And she add her to the list of people where it's like, I can't believe she only worked with him once. Bening, Cruise, Nicholson. I can't believe some of these people stopped at one because they're terrific with this dialogue.
I understand why, but I would throw Michael J. Fox in there.
For sure.
Like, obviously the reason why makes sense, and that's it sucks.
Very difficult. It's a very difficult script to work with, and his health declining would prevent him from doing something that difficult.
Yeah, like
he is a terrific actor who is born for that too. He's great at this.
He's so good at it. I would also put Baldwin in that list.
Baldwin is someone that I'm shocked only worked with him once.
Yeah, Baldwin is also really good. But yeah, I agree with that. And did we say George C. Scott? Because that's another one. Like,
George C. Scott was a very late game. If Sorkin was writing in the 70s, George C. Scott and him probably would have made like 6 movies together. Like, I think that's just a fact.
Yeah. No, Scott reading Sorkin dialogue makes
is great.
But anyway, I'm gonna talk.
The next sort of thing we get into is the pool scene, which is really fun. I love their dynamic. This is where you really get to see Sheen and Douglas's friendship on display and their history. And even while he's still calling him Mr. President, their personal jabs and barbs with each other is really fun. And where he's like, I also love it. He was like, I'm thinking about asking that Sydney Ellen Wade girl out, and he's like, well, sir, if you want female companionship, I'm sure we can arrange something discreet. And he's like, I don't want you to give me a girl agent. Like, they're so fun. They're so fun. This isn't Vegas. They're just so good together. I think the scene is terrific.
No, they are so good at bouncing off of each other, and they've worked. You know that they've worked together before, right?
What were they in together before?
Martin Sheen's in Wall Street.
Oh, that's right. He is in Wall Street. I forgot that he's in Wall Street.
He's Charlie Sheen's dad in Wall Street, and also real life.
Which is perfect because their father son in real life.
Have you ever seen Hot Shots Part 2?
Oh, I've seen the scene. I've seen their
You've seen the clip where they're doing like the parody of Apocalypse Now, and they both go by each other, and they both say to each other, I loved you in Wall Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that moment. But anyway, so, and I think the fact that that's another case where the casting just hits because it's two guys who probably were friends in real life. So like they feel like it. They feel
right. Well, they come from the same. They come from the same time, so they feel like they were probably friends in the 70s.
There's a certain level of authenticity to their friendship that I think really works, and that is a great scene. And it sets up again. We kind of talked about it, but that sets up like that core dynamic of the movie, and then I love that kind of leads into Michael Douglas struggling. This is a very funny scene. Michael Douglas struggling and failing to call Annette Bening is very funny.
Well, they set this up a little bit earlier in the movie where she has a friend who can do a really good Shepard impression. And then she gets off the phone with said friend. And then Michael Douglas calls. And she hangs up on him. And she's like, no, there's no way I did this twice in one day. And he's like, Sydney, I want you to hang up the phone. Hang up the phone. Dial this number. And when you get the receptionist, ask for the president. And he just hangs up the phone. And she goes, no. And she dials back. And she's like, Mr. President, I am so... It's just... And I go, it's so good. It's a continuation of their dynamic from the introduction scene. And they just keep going. And I love... It's hysterical. I think this is what Reiner absolutely crushes. Where in A Few Good Men, he's very good at timing thrilling, dramatic moments in tension. This, he is absolutely on fire with comedic timing. He gets to do the opposite and just crushes. Reiner's a great director in that time span.
He's a great director of drama and comedy, but he's great at comedy because that's like his background, right?
He and his dad.
He and his dad. B, he starts, his directing career with This Is Spinal Tap.
Right.
He starts with this, working with Christopher Guest, doing a full-on documentary. And his whole career, with a few,
it starts with comedy. He's mostly doing comedy.
Starts with comedy, and even in the 70s. You know what sitcom he was on, right?
Right, he's on. Oh God, I'm blanking. Help me! It's almost midnight.
He was on. Know it. He was on All in the Family.
Oh, it's fucking right. He's on All in the Family.
He was like the son that Archie Bunker hated on All of the Family because Nick was Meathead, and that's what. So, and he was of course good friends with Albert Brooks. Shout out,
of course. Who we will cover on this show one day. It will happen.
Absolutely. But anyway, he was good friends with Albert Brooks. He comes from an incredibly comedic background, Definitely. And his dad was a great comedic director. And he has those comedic timing sensibilities down flat here in that scene. Like, the editing is so important to the phone call scene. He knocks it out of the park. I will say, this is once Annette Bening and Michael Douglas actually show up at the
state dinner.
Yeah. For me, this is when the movie starts going down a little bit.
Oh, really? I think this is when it really kicks into overdrive.
That's interesting.
I think this I think when they find like when they're up there slow dancing and they're basically put on display as the president has a partner, is
Mhm.
when their relationship gets really interesting, where then they now have to figure out their interpersonal dynamic because then they do the room in the China room and they go through all that where it's like, will you ever see me as more than the president? Like personally, their dynamic becomes really interesting where it's like it gets deeper because they still have those moments where they see the daughter and they have spent time in the East Wing together, and it's really sweet and romantic. But then when it gets intimate, and she's like, "I don't know if I can be intimate with the president," and he's like, "Well, you haven't seen me past the man in the office," and you get that sort of the realism seeping in. I think that makes it it gives it a new dimension. But then you also get the opposite end where the conflict really kicks in, where you get a terrific performance from Richard Dreyfuss as who gets to be who is injected into this movie almost halfway through the real antagonist of the movie shows up and he steals his scenes when he comes in as an unrecognizable dick. He's just great where he's like, yeah, when we ran against him we couldn't beat him because he was a widower. No, everyone felt sympathy for him. You can't attack a widower. And then the guy's like, well, he's still a widower. It's just been 3 years. And he's like, you have to forgive him. He's been on a fishing trip the last couple of weeks. And he pulls up the newspapers like, president's got a girlfriend. You're like, let's go. That's the conflict is in. Because then it becomes half political drama where it's like he needs to get his bill through, which is now tied to his personal relationship that he didn't think he was going to have. And you have that conflict. Well, it's also mixed with the actual just the thesis that we keep talking about, the man versus the office. I think the central conceit of the movie in the second half gets even more interesting than the fun light rom-com half at the beginning. I think it just gets even more interesting.
I I slightly disagree there because while I agree with you on the political stuff, I think that's the thing, and it makes so much sense to me when you said that because I didn't know that Redford wanted it to be a rom com. Reiner was more interested in the political stuff because I think you can tell once we actually get like the actual two characters together. Reiner cares way more about the political ramifications of everything than he actually does about the relationship between Shepard and them. And that's what
I think he threads those two together well.
Meet you, but once they're like together, it's kind of like give us something a little bit more. And I don't think it ever gets to that point because I don't think he's quite fully invested.
I think it does, though. I would push back on that. I think it does a really good job of weaving the two narratives together because because they are the same narrative. The thing is, like the political success is the relationship because at this point, and that comes to the head. If the bill fails, the relationship fails, and he has to make that decision. Where then the thesis comes to a full head, where he goes, "Now that I have that relationship, now I have to be the office." And I'm gonna lose my girlfriend over my office. And this is why. This is why I can't be the man. I have to be the office. And it's like that. I think that culmination comes from the second act. I think Reiner marries the two really well. Where it's while the first half is a lot more relationship heavy, it's because you have to set it up. But I think the second half their political lives become their personal lives. And that's why that dynamic doesn't seem like there's a lot happening. It's because it's the same narrative. He's not necessarily shooting full on rom com moments like the first half anymore, but they still matter. So, like, when they're like, we got to sneak you out of the White House, da 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 da, like that whole conversation, I think those still are the rom com moments, but they are reinforcing the political half, the optics, we need to get this lobbyist out of here because the moment in the China room reinforces it when she's like, will you ever see me more as a lobbyist? Well, will you ever see me more than being the president? And it's that moment just keeps getting multiplied. Each interaction they have where press gets involved, where he gets up there and he talks about the bill and they're like, who's the woman you danced with? And he's like, I'm not answering. We got to keep our eye on the ball. And like that just gets more and more messy as the movie gets on. And I think Reiner understands that those two plot lines are the same plot line and nails it.
I guess I understand what you're saying. I don't quite 100% agree, but I at least see your point. But yeah, where do you want to take this next?
I think the next best moment is a moment that is directly lifted into the West Wing in the episode Shibboleth, I believe, where he calls about the turkey. When he calls a flower, it's my favorite joke in the movie actually. Where he calls the flower shop. He calls the flower shop. He's like, I would like 2 dozen roses, and they're just like, Yeah, I'd like them delivered to the White House. Is the president. Hello? It's like just a Douglas crushes it. Just to have and it keeps reinforcing that point where it's like the man in the office. I think that thesis is so hammered into every scene and it makes it so interesting. But that's my favorite joke. I think that joke is really funny.
No, that's fair. I do really like that scene, and then it ends up with him. I love how the way they resolve it. He gives her a ham.
It's so good.
That is very funny. I do really like that he gives her a ham. But we keep bringing up West Wing things, and I think that is honestly probably the biggest hurdle I have to overcome with this movie, which is every time I watch it, I'm like, why am I watching this when I could be watching The West Wing?
See,
not because it's not great, but because they're so similar, and The West Wing is better. It's like, why would I watch this when I could?
The way I view this is they're separate entities that share the same DNA. It to me, it'd be like picking a version of West Side Story or picking a version of something else. It's whatever I'm in the mood for, because I think The American President, while it shares a lot of DNA with The West Wing has so many different characters that are more fully fleshed out, that have more time, because you have 72 hours with these people, a season or whatever it is. So it's like you have so much more time to flesh them out and go on different stories. You have a bunch of small stories to choose with each person. I really like that there's this version of that same world that I can watch in 2 hours. That's a very different kind of story. It's very romantic. It's a different president, has different types of the same roles. I like getting to see Michael J. Fox. I think there's enough merit and special stuff about The American President that separates it enough from The West Wing for me that I do really enjoy coming back to The American President. I think it's very sweet. I think this movie is really nice. And I think there's a lot to love about it. While a lot of this does go on to influence my favorite television show of all time, and I will gladly throw on any episode of The West Wing and have a great time with it and live in that world with those characters. Except for season 5. At Caleb Koho wrote a better one. I wrote a better season 5, and you agree with me.
Here's the thing. I don't disagree with you. We're gonna get so much crap for that.
Oh, I don't care. I have a better fifth. I'm a better writer than John Wells, and I'll say it right now. But I love The American President.
The likelihood of anyone making it this far into the show who hates you is very low. I'm very glad that is the
But I just think The American President has a lot to love about its own merits, and that you can separate the two and enjoy them separately. And I don't think that the involvement or existence of the other demerits the other in any way. I think that's just two similar kinds of products that you can enjoy with whatever you're feeling. But I really do love Michael Douglas in this and Annette Bening in this, and I can't get them in The West Wing.
That is fair. Okay. Is there anything else before the ending speech we want to bring up?
Not really. I think like the second act I will give you this. The second half of this movie does get to be a little bit samey, where it's like we're going to have a lot of scenes that are similar while we build towards the ending. That doesn't necessarily bother me because I do love all the scenes enough where it's like I don't mind watching the same scene a couple times over because they're all fun. But I do understand that being a hurdle or a hang up with the movie. But I think when it culminates in that final speech, Sorkin speeches are so good. He's so good at the inspirational speech, the speech. And he gets into it in all of his shows. He gets into it in Social Network, in all sorts of movies that we're going to cover. But I think this speech is honestly the first speech where he is giving the Sorkin speech. Like, A Few Good Men has a lot of good, like, monologues, but they don't feel like the speeches. And there's absolutely, like, and while the God Complex scene is great in Malice, that doesn't feel like a Sorkin speech. It feels like another one of those monologues.
Those are Sorkin villain speeches, which are also...
They're monologues. They're great monologues.
They're great monologues, but they're not Sorkin is great at the rousing speech. The inspirational, optimistic, whatever you want to call it, that type of speech. That you get that in
Moneyball, in Steve Jobs, in The Trial of the Chicago 7, in Being the Ricardos. There are so many of those rousing speeches. In Molly's Game, there's great rousing speeches, and he's very good at that. And this is the first time we get that. And honestly, I love it. There's so many of them in the West Wing and in Sports Night and in Newsroom and all that as well. But like this
You
is
have
the
not
first time
seen
we get the
Sports
sort.
Night. You have
What?
not seen Sports Night.
I have seen episodes of Sports Night, sir.
Oh, I didn't realize that you had seen.
I've never seen the entire show all the way through, but I've
That's
seen episodes of Sports Night.
fair.
I have seen episodes of every show he's ever made. I've only seen 2 of the shows in their entirety.
That's fair.
Them being The West Wing and Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
That is fair.
I think he's so good at the rousing speech, and it's such a great. It's the only way to end this movie.
Yeah.
It's a great scene.
No, absolutely. It's a really good speech. And then Sorkin loves his happy endings, and I think this one's earned. I will say, I feel like I have been a little hard on this movie because I do really like it. It's just, it's hard for me to love it, but I do really like it. But yeah, that was
to give a quick check in with the world of Sorkin. We do have to do the Sorkin post this world because then we will do the break. Sorkin. So the American president makes $60 million. Totals 107 million. Off a budget of 62. So it makes money. It's a box office success. So Sorkin has sort of returned to form on the box office. And Siskel and Ebert give it 2 thumbs up. So he's back on the Siskel and Ebert train. Funny enough, they both were very surprised with how good the movie was, considering Rob Reiner's previous film North was their both selection for worst movie of the year.
They famously hated North. That is probably their most.
He said he was extremely pleased to give it a unanimously positive review for the American president.
The famous quote from Roger Ebert about North is, "I hated this movie." And as someone who's seen North, he's correct.
So after this is the last. I think the last overwhelmingly positively received movie from Rob Reiner. He goes off a cliff pretty much after this.
I mean, he has Mississippi, which gets some Oscar love, but nothing. It's a middler. It's not, a
right.
big.
He doesn't
have a big film late.
This is the last major success of his career.
Yes, I would agree with.
And for Sorkin, this is the last movie he writes for 12 years. It takes him 12 years to come back to film. That is because of a couple things which we'll get into right now. He continues to write for movies, but he works as a script doctor, tuning up other films. He writes quips for Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage's characters in The Rock. He is literally designated as the quipper in the credits.
Which is part of the reason why The Rock works so well, because the back and forth between the two of them is chef's kiss.
He rewrote a little bit of Excess Baggage, a 1997 comedy about a girl who stages her own kidnapping to get her father's attention. He rewrote some of Will Smith's scenes in Enemy of the State. He collaborates with Warren Beatty on several drafts of Bulworth, not enough to get him guild arbitration as a writer, but close. It was enough where they were like, he could get a screenplay credit on Bulworth. It's that much work he did on it.
Which, had he gotten in, he would have gotten his first Oscar nomination. Had he been considered a writer for that, he would have gotten his first Oscar nomination, because Bulworth was nominated for adapted screenplay. And you can smell the Sorkin on Bulworth. You can absolutely smell the Sorkin on Bulworth.
Another funny story is that Beatty, who would personally finance his own film projects through pre-production, hired Sorkin to rewrite a script he had called Ocean of Storms, which never went into production. Sorkin ended up suing Warren Beatty for proper compensation because he was never actually paid. Beatty then paid him years later for working on the script. It took a lot of years.
No one likes Warren Beatty, is the thing.
Except for his wife, Annette Bening.
I did not actually remember that Annette Bening was Warren Beatty's wife.
Right. Maybe that's why Bening. Maybe that lawsuit's the reason why Bening doesn't work with Sorkin.
That actually makes sense. But no, like Warren. You know what famous song is about Warren Beatty, right?
No.
The chorus of Carly Simon's "You're So Vain, You Probably Think This Song Is About You" is about Warren Beatty, because he would reportedly assume that different songs were about him.
Wow. That's
So
insane.
the verses are not, but the choruses are confirmed to be about Warren Beatty.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So then he goes into television for the remaining 9 to 8 years so that he doesn't write a movie. His first television show he writes is Sports Night, which is about the behind-the-scenes happenings on the sports radio show. He wrote it while living at the Four Seasons in LA while writing The American President. While working late, he would tune into ESPN, watch continuous replays of Sports Center. Disney bought and produced it. The first season had a infamous laugh track. He hated the laugh track. It would be removed. After that, he would work on The West Wing, which is arguably the thing that he is most well known for in his career, is creating and writing the first 4 seasons of that show on NBC with John Wells. It was supposed to come out, but it was pushed due to the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. The Clinton White House is a heavy influence on that show. He uses a lot of things from this show. There's a lot of stories about that, and eventually, I'm sure Boat and I will start a spin-off podcast called The West Wing Watch Along or something and go through it episode by episode. I'm sure we'll do that eventually. But after that,
we really need
after the 4th season, he and Tommy Schlamme leave the show. John Wells takes over. Sorkin has never watched any episodes beyond writing his tenure, but he did come back for a cameo in the series finale. And then in 2005,
Sorkin end up watching them for his masterclass.
No, he watched only the first episode of season 5 and he stopped.
I thought for his masterclass, because the whole thing about his masterclass is like rewriting season 5.
Oh, he might. Maybe that's something. It's not on the Wikipedia that I'm looking at here, so I'm
Fair
not
enough.
sure.
I'm like 70% sure for his masterclass he did that. But anyway, I digress. Then
it's Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Yes.
Which is a one-seasoner. The reason why it doesn't succeed is because it is in direct competition with Tina Fey's 30 Rock, and 30 Rock wins in the battle of the 2 first seasons, which is unfortunate because Studio they could both exist. They're very different shows.
The big difference is that it is very hard to pitch what is essentially a 1-hour drama that is about a sketch comedy show. Versus it's much easier to pitch what is a 30-minute sitcom that is about a sketch comedy show. Right, 30 Rock was funnier. You can say about Studio 60's like actual like ability. 30 Rock was just frankly a funnier show. And when it's something about comedy, people want the funnier thing. And that's the sad truth. But it seemed to be good with Sorkin because like few seasons later, he actually cameoed on 30 Rock, playing himself.
Exactly. He loves it. He loves Studio 60. It's one of his favorite shows that he made. It had 12 million people tuned into the pilot. So it was a hit at start. It just declined over time. And unfortunately, it did not go through. He also had a spec script he wrote called The Farnsworth Invention that was then turned into a Broadway play, which was his return to Broadway. And that fills in the gaps before we get to 2007. And when he is commissioned by Universal to adapt George Crowell's nonfiction book, Charlie Wilson's War, for Tom Hanks' production company Playtone, a biographical comedy about a colorful Texas congressman, Charlie Wilson, who funded the CIA's secret war against the former Soviet Union in Afghanistan, directed by Mike Nichols, co-starring Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and earned 5 nominations at the Golden Globes, including Best Screenplay for Aaron Sorkin, who had been previously nominated for 2 Golden Globes for A Few Good Men and The American President.
We won't get into that.
We won't get into that for 5 weeks. Enjoy your break, because now we are going into the world of Benjamin James Affleck.
Is that his middle name?
I have no idea. It sounds good, though.
For the next few weeks, in honor of Air, which we are both unreasonably excited about, we are going to be breaking down Ben Affleck's directorial career. Then we will come right back into Aaron Sorkin. But we're going to be talking about
Benjamin Geza Affleck.
Okay, then. Next week, we will be talking about Gone Baby Gone, his first film, which I have never seen.
I have also never seen. It's one of the rare times when we are both experiencing a first-time watch.
This will be very interesting. Tune in next week for that.
We will probably watch that live together in Iowa this weekend.
We should do that. Legitimately, we should do that. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to Caleb Koho, my co-host, as always. we will see you all. Thank you to Video Store. We will see you all next week.